All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's webinar, our customer marketing series, Voiceover Meet Video. My name is Kimaya Sharp. I am your customer marketing strategist here at WellSaid, and I am very excited to welcome you all here today. I'm truly excited about this webinar because I think it touches on hands-on production workflows, which is highly tangible for everybody who's joining us today. But before we get started, and while we're allowing everybody to kind of trickle in, please feel free to drop your name and where you are located. I'm here in the chat so that we kind of see who's with us, what time zones we have here. And while we're doing that, just know that if you have any questions at any time during this webinar, please feel free to drop them in our Q&A section, or you can simply put your questions in the chat and we will do our best to answer them live. We do have a product support team who is on standby to answer those questions for you promptly. Hello there. We have St. Louis, we have Texas. All right, wonderful. Welcome to you both. Let's see who else we have here with us today. I am actually in South Florida. I see we have Wisconsin. And Chris, where are you chiming in from today?
I'm in Dubai.
Dubai. Oh, so
Yeah,
you
it's
are actually the furthest away right
eight,
now.
yeah, 8 p.m. in Dubai.
Oh, wow. Well, we thank you very much for joining
Oh,
us.
anytime. Yeah.
Awesome. I see more people chiming in here. We have North Carolina. All right. California, Ecuador. All right.
Ecuador is much further away. Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. Again, thank you all so much for your participation today. Regardless of what time of day it is, we appreciate you joining in, and we will go ahead and get started with our series today. So, as you can see, and as I mentioned earlier, it is voiceover meet video. So, with this, I am very happy to introduce all the way from Dubai, Chris Beavis, who is the partner at the Frameworks. And for those who may not be familiar with the organization, Chris, would you mind just telling us a little bit about it as well as yourself?
Sure. Thank you very much. I should clarify, I'm actually from London. I'm in Dubai this week for a tech expo called GITEX. The Frameworks is essentially what you'd recognize as a brand and marketing agency. So we work with a number of global brands on a variety of activities. It could range from brand strategy, kind of quite foundational strategic work, through to brand positioning and platforming, into creative and content, and then digital as well. My background is in software development, so I kind of fell into brand and marketing about 15 years ago. And with the other partners, I work to essentially help our clients do a better job of telling their stories, and really focusing in on the impact they have and can have with their clients. And um, quite topical for today, one of the ways we do that is through assets that include voice. So yeah, very, very excited to be talking to you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And like you said, oh, wow. See, Paris is here as well. So, bonjour. Like you said, it's important how we tell our story. And one of those biggest integrations is really in video. I know that, oftentimes we hear things, we may read things, but video is everywhere. So, that could be our training materials, our marketing, client education, all forms of communication, whether it be social media, or any other platform. But voiceover, I know by doing this customer webinar series, it still seems to be something that can potentially slow teams down. So, like I said, I've just learned from doing this webinar series and being able to speak to so many people that there seems to be a common pain point that comes across so many different industries when you speak to inconsistent quality. Cost revisions is one of the biggest things that I've heard consistently, compliance concerns, and even things like brand voice drift. So that's why I think we're excited to have you here. As you've
Mhm.
seen firsthand how AI voice, like WellSaid, can really help shift things like client engagement, like you said, sharing your story, being able to speed up those workflows and open new creative possibilities. So let's talk about that just a bit.
Yeah,
Now,
sure. I think. Oh,
go ahead.
sorry, you go. You got a question.
No, I was just going to say, I think that we have been fortunate enough to be able to have a case study done with the frameworks. So we understand your use case a little bit better, but I'll let you chime in and then we can kind of go on to the next question that I had.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think that yeah, we try to be in the business of storytelling, and I think when you look at voice and speech, it's hands down the most effective communication tool we have as humans. We had an oral tradition many thousands of years before we had a written tradition, and our history was oral for most of our existence. And I think that where we find ourselves is that we would like to be using voice more. It's a fantastic way to communicate so many things in so many ways. That the problem is that it's very costly, both in time, in terms of the amount of time it takes to generate historically, the cost of it, hiring, whether it be hiring the talent or the space in which to do it, costly to revise, and also we find ourselves doing our best work when we're in the creative process, trying ideas out. Is that going to work? What would it be like if we tried that? Now, when you're doing that with something like video or voice, it becomes very costly to go to the places you want to go to. And I think we're doing an awful lot of work with AI now, as a lot of people are. And I think one of the things that I find most fascinating about it is I can have an idea, I can bring it to life very quickly to test the thinking. I can say, is that the thought I'm having, where I want to go creatively, can I get there? Historically, I probably wouldn't even try because it would cost too much in resources, either my time or money, to even look down those avenues. Whereas now, whether it is through video or through voice, we can go on that journey with the client. We can explore more possibilities. We can go to more territories. So I think the revolution I think that is happening across AI, not just voice, is um, we're closing the gap between having an idea and seeing it come to life. What would it look like if, and then getting to that answer very quickly. I think how that pertains to voice is we have always wanted to use voice more. We've always wanted to put it in more things, but often it doesn't work in terms of budget or time to do that. And I think with video generation, with platforms like Sora, you're now seeing that in video as well. You can go and test these things, and what WellSaid are doing is such a lovely complement to that, because we can be using something like Sora to generate, or Runway or Kling to generate the part of the video content, not all of it, but it will allow us to test things quickly that may or may not work. And it's the same for voice. We can then put voice on top of that and test out different voices. Again, we would never consider lining up 10 voice actors and asking them to, obviously you can hear what they sound like, but you want to meet them, you want to see if they get the project. Very hard to do that with real talent. And I think that the reason that WellSaid are a good draw for us is it doesn't bury the idea of needing voice talent. What it does is it scales voice talent. The voice talent is still the source, but it scales it. So you can use the same voice at scale. And with generative AI, we're seeing more and more, especially this week at GITEX. I mean, there's not a single stand it's the biggest tech conference in the world. There's not a single stand that hasn't got some form of AI on it. And we're now able to use AI to interact with people in the moment through speech generation. And in order for that to work, it's got to be good. It's got to be realistic. The voice has got to sound good, authentic. And of all the we do, disclaimer, we have used other platforms, but of the platforms we use, when we need the quality, like when we need that really sharp, controllable voice that sounds authentic, then that's when we come to WellSaid. So for us, it's having a massive impact on what we're able to achieve with our clients, what we're able to do creatively. Um, Sorry, I'll keep talking until you tell me to stop. So maybe you ask a question and I'll respond.
No worries at all. There was something that you said, just kind of the ability to kind of imagine something and kind of bring it to life. That was very loosely translated, but along the lines of what
No,
you
that was
said.
good.
So, are there any new capabilities or assurances that you're able to offer your clients that you weren't really able to offer before? I know you mentioned certain integrations. You have almost like putting AI voice actors on the casting couch to be able to scale that way. But are there any other things that you necessarily couldn't do before that you've really been able to benefit from?
Yeah, there's a couple of things really. One is I suppose there's a kind of more strategic side to it and a more practical side. On the strategic side, we work a lot of our time is spent working with brands on their brand. You know what, and for us, brand is not what the logo is or the color. The brand is the promise you make, right? What promise are you making to your customers and to your audience, and the promise that you're gonna stick with, you're gonna stand behind. And whether if you think of the examples of Apple's Think Different or Nike's Just Do It. It's a promise that is we refer to it as quick to understand but slow to fade. So you get it and it's strong and it stays. Now, there's no reason whatsoever that you shouldn't consider voice as one of the components of a brand. If you spend the time thinking about photography style and typography and um, these other kind of tone of voice choices that you make as part of a brand exercise, then in the same way you would have guidelines for those elements, you should be thinking about voice, the speech, as a component. You know, if you've got a brand that needs to produce video with voice, then pick a voice that is aligned to your brand, and that's what we're trying to educate our customers on. We're saying, look, access to this is going to become normal. You're gonna be able to own a voice, a brand voice, and it helps with things like brand consistency. Like you wouldn't put together brand guidelines and then accept that, you know, we're always pushing the envelope on brand guidelines, but there's pushing the envelope and just going off piece and doing something completely different. Now you find in a lot of organizations, because of the way voice is sourced, you'll end up with a suite of videos and there's a different voice on every one. Some of them are excitable, some of them are more muted, some of them have an accent or not. And sometimes that's a deliberate creative decision, but in most cases, it's just teams that are not necessarily talking to each other, picking a voice that they like. And what that over time, you end up in this brand debt where you're producing assets that have different voices. And before too long, there's no consistency whatsoever. So I think strategically, brands should be looking to incorporate voice as part of their foundational brand architecture. On the more practical side, one of the things that is often difficult from an agency side, and is part of the process, is the revision, right? So we'll come up with an idea, and it's incredibly unlikely that the thing you come up with is 100% right. It's like hitting a hole in one; like it just doesn't happen. Now, the good agencies will get very close to the hole in one. They'll get onto the green, to stretch the analogy, and some will end up in the rough. Now, we're always trying to get ourselves onto the green, but you don't get the hole in one. So what ends up happening is you send it to the client, and we've all been in that situation, and they've got some comments, right? They've got, and often it's not even, it has to even go to more people. So eventually you'll get some revisions back, and that could be as simple as, can you remove that word? I mean, something completely innocent, like, can we change that word for the other word, even though we had the script signed. I'm being a bit unfair now, but we had the script signed off 2 weeks ago, but now we're changing the scripts, right? Always happens. But we're changing words around. Fine, makes perfect sense. Um, in the traditional case, we, the agency and or the marketing team, would have to bear that cost. We'd have to rehire the actor. We'd have to find the space. We'd have to go back through, and God forbid there's another set of revisions. So there's no scalability in the existing model, right? Or you have to make a compromise. You have to say to the client, I've tried to be in the business of, as politely as possible, never saying no. Try not to say no. Try to work the problem. Just try to, no, but we could do this other thing. So you want to be offering solutions, and one of those solutions now at our disposal is, we can work very quickly on a script. We can stand it up on its feet using a voice from WellSaid. We can send that to the client. They can have a listen. Does that sound along the lines? They'll have some comments. So we can get the voiceover nailed before we even go into things like creative. Like, before we can give a fully signed off voiceover that everyone's heard, it's been tweaked, before we then go to the animator or to the videographer. That is where the real cost is felt, when you've gone far enough down the line that you've done creative, you've done animation, you're in post-production, and then changes are made. Because then you're having to rewind a whole lot of stuff. And again, just speaking from the agency side, it's margins are already tight. So you're already in a situation where you're having to be very careful with what you're doing, and to have to deal with that on top is very difficult. So for us, well said, it's had a massive impact in terms of us being able to explore those creative paths with clients. Yes, we should change that word. Yes, we should, because it doesn't bear any debt for anyone. It's not a massive additional cost. So I think the way I'm feeling about voice is there's some brilliant practical applications, and the long-term view, I think, is that voice is something that will become more apparent in terms of communication, whether that's agentic, you're talking to something. I write a lot of code in my day to day. I still try and write as much code as I can. And the thing I'm wanting or thinking about is being able to speak to an agent. At the moment, I'm doing a lot of coding with AI where I'm typing and it's typing back to me and I'm reading. What I really want is to be able to talk to it. I could describe in a lot short with a lot less effort. I could describe the problem or the feature or whatever I'm doing, and to have it talk back to me in a very natural way. That collaboration would feel a lot more productive than having to type everything out. It's why we're doing this. We could have done this webinar over text message, but it wouldn't have been very engaging. So you want to hear the voice, you want to hear people talking to each other. And just to touch on, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but just to touch on the kind of more ethical side of things, you know, one of the things I do like about WellSaid is you're trying to find an answer for the problem of what happens to the voice actor, because it would be very easy to just tear down a path where they become unnecessary. And I think that's a very short-term view, because I think that may be a solve for today, but it's not really a solve for tomorrow. And I think the solution we probably want to be getting towards, and this isn't just around voice, this is around actors and video. This is an emerging challenge of our time. As AI comes in and starts to make scalable things that previously weren't scalable, and in the process redefines job roles. How do we work to find ways through that do not lose that human ingenuity? Because AI is retrospective. AI is as good today as the information it had yesterday, right? It's an accumulation of information it has had. Now, if we go down the path of not creating any new stuff, then it's just going to atrophy. It's going to get worse and worse over time, because it's just eating itself, right? It's not contribute. No one's contributing the new idea. So there's a balance out there, which is, yes, AI. Yeah, I'm fully on board. I mean, most of what I'm doing every day at the moment is AI, but I'm also very conscious of, if we give up things like critical thinking or creativity or these other things, again, you'll see a short-term gain, but a massive long-term loss. So when that applies to the voice actor, I think that having voice talent be the input, and then well said, be the mechanism for scale, I think that's a relationship that seems to have a bit of longevity. Um, so yeah, I think that it's a responsibility that we all have to kind of take on, and we're very proud that to be working with WellSaid on, and helping to. And sorry, just for full disclosure, WellSaid are a client of ours. I don't want anyone to think that I'm being sycophantic. I do. We as I said, we do use other platforms, but I'm very aligned to the way that WellSaid think about this challenge, and I think it's a good thing.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much for that elaborate answer. That was beautiful. And I think it touched on some questions that I wanted to ask already. While we are on the subject of ethics, I think it would probably be good for us to discuss, as in detail as you like to, with anyone who hasn't had the pleasure of talking to others about, utilization of AI voice before. How do you talk to your clients about voice talent, IP, reuse rights, anything like that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, again, it's become abundant over the last year. The access to voice. There's so many platforms out there, and voice generation is not a new thing. I remember having a Mac laptop 20 years ago, 25 years ago, that had some form of generate, but it was very robotic. So voice generation is not a new thing, but good, authentic, human sounding voice generation is very much a new thing. I think when we're considering voice with our clients, we probably have the same approach that we would have with a lot of things. So we would not, for instance, give them copy that had been plagiarized. We would not give them photography that had not been paid for. We would not steal someone else's brand idea and recycle it as this. Yeah, so there's I think the existing set of ethics that we have in the creative industries are perfectly applicable to voice. And with that in mind, I would be making the same comments. I would be saying, um, how has this been sourced? How where is this voice coming from? Is this voice likely to be used on something that you don't want it to be used on? Because if we're talking about brand association, if we're talking about using this voice as a key component of your brand, then you should treat it in the way you treat all the other components of your brand, which is you would want to, for instance, lock down or trademark or somehow protect that voice into the future. And one of the things we often find with clients is that we work on, say, a video series where we're working on videos over an extended period of time. So we might be working on a series of videos that run over, say, 2 years, where we'll once a quarter we'll do a video on a topic, let's say a campaign that's got a long life on it. It's often quite difficult to find relationships with actors that go on that. It does happen, but it's a lot easier for us to say, right, that campaign, that voice from now on, like that is locked in. There is consistency, and we know that at any point in the future, if they want to do another video, we have that voice available to us. We're not going to have a problem where the actor has moved away or is no longer doing that as an occupation, or they're not available. We're not having to, we're not at the mercy of the environment. We're actually in control of the environment. I think that's one thing that is quite appealing again when it comes to WellSaid, and having those relationships with the actual actors. These are not voices that have been amalgamated or synthesized from many voices, and there's no real person behind it. It's no, this is a real voice from a real person. They're being remunerated. They're having some kind of financial relationship with WellSaid where they are benefiting from what WellSaid are able to do. So there's kind of a symbiotic relationship between both WellSaid and the talent. And when we're discussing this with clients, they will align to both the ethical side, as in this is still supporting that occupation, that community. It's safer for you from a compliance and standards point of view. It allows us to explore more creative territory together. And if I'm being brutally honest, it's more cost effective. That we attempt to, when we're costing things, be conscious of what our costs are. And if we're not having to hire talent multiple times because this thing needs revision, then that is a cost that can be passed on to the customer. So it helps us from a margin point of view and being competitive. It helps them in terms of them being able to have those revisions or make creative decisions that don't have financial impact for them and their budget.
Awesome. Thank you for that answer. Now, I mentioned our case study that we were able to do on you before, and I think it's safe to say that the frameworks and WellSaid, we built quite the relationship. As you mentioned, we are a client of yours. You all do amazing work. So
Okay.
we've had some content that I believe we'll dive into for a particular workflow right now. Correct?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's watch the video.
All right. So let me see if I can get that pulled up for us here.
Creating a voiceover with AI can be a real mission. Most of the voices sound pretty fake and aren't customizable. At WellSaid, we create beautiful AI voices that actually sound human, like me. Because we use real actors to develop professional-grade voices that are licensed. Choose from hundreds of voices and get to work creating your next piece of amazing content. Make every story WellSaid.
Awesome. All right. So that was our 30-second explainer video put together by the frameworks. So let's speak on that a little bit. Talk about, I guess, the overall workflow with it, and some best practices that people would be able to utilize and implement within their own work. You are muted.
I was, yeah, sorry. Yeah, thank you. I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that video in quite a while, so that was quite nice. Um, yeah, I think it's I know it's a bit meta because it's about well said, but it's fairly typical of the process that we would go through. So we, for our part, we would first of all come up with the kind of the narrative approach. What story are we trying to tell? What arc are we trying to go through? And the arc in this one is obviously trying to set up the challenge. Voice is tricky. Um, but having access to choice, having access to quality, means that you're able to get to where you want to go creatively a lot quicker. Um, and in particular, that video, I think we did that. That was, I can't remember when we did that. It was a few months ago, but what we were trying to do is explore different ways of telling that story. And I remember we went through a few versions of the storyboard. One was a bit more on the actors and diving into that. One was a bit more about the platform and the technology, and we kind of found a middle ground between the two that we liked, with you guys. And again, it's a good illustration of us being able to explore all three routes. We wouldn't have gone at that point in the process. We wouldn't have gone to the effort of hiring a voice actor to get into the studio for content. Two of the three were going to go in the bin. So we're not gonna go down that route if we don't have to, but we could. We went down that route. We were looking at how the narrative fit together. So we were coming out of that initial kind of strategic process with the voiceover already done. So if I can go then talk to an animator or a videographer or a designer and say, right, here's the voice, here's the pacing, here's the length, here's the creative behind it, it makes their job so much easier. Because I think in practice, although people wouldn't like to admit it, I think in practice what happens is you get most of that stuff, and then because of time deadlines and needing to get stuff done, you probably start the creative before you would have got to that point, because you want to put the storyboards together, you want to get going, you don't want to wait for the voice. So um, this allowed us to stay a bit more methodical and say, right, we've got the strategy, we've got the script, we've got the voice options, we've picked one, and now we're able to go into the process. So I actually have the project open. If you want to, I can show it, and we can have a look.
Let's
Um,
dive into it.
I'm not on the product team at WellSaid, so I don't know how good a job I'm going to do here, but I'll try my best. And if I don't know if we've got a Q&A later, but I'm sure that yeah, I'm sure that we can get into that. So we again, we another thing that helped is we went through almost like a casting couch thing. Like we had identified 10 voices that we think could work, and we went kind of almost like an American Idol, like whittling it down until we were down to kind of two voices. We ran both the three versions of the script for both of those final voices, and they were very close, but in the end we went for Alana, and I think she gave a really good, it was a really good clean take on what we needed. So and what I like about being in here is that I can get a bit of variation like you would with a voice actor. If you asked a voice actor to do 3 or 4 takes, you would get some kind of variance that is often interesting. So little inflections, little pauses, and I think it's those things that make it's like anything. It's like music. It's the imperfections that make it authentic. It's not how accurate it is. It's how the inaccuracies are accurate. And I find with Wells you get those little kind of nice inflections, nice little kind of spaces in the words that you would get if you were actually talking to someone. So I've kind of picked out a segment, just a small segment. People I found, and even within our team, we use this differently. The way I like to use Wells is I like to go line by line. I like to get each line just absolutely nailed, do a few variations, and then I'll move on to the next line, and then we'll kind of stitch it all together. That's not the only way to use it. You can just put in your whole script, and it will just go through the whole thing. If there are pieces that you want to change in that whole the reason I go line by line is sometimes I want to tweak little bits, and it's easier than doing the whole thing together. But as I say, it is a little while since we created this. So we've got, if I play the previous one, and if my audio is not working, tell me. I'm going to play this.
Choose from hundreds of voices and get to work.
Did that come through?
That came through.
That came through. Fantastic. So we'll generate another one. I've picked that passage. So I mean that was what, a second or two. I mean just incredibly quick. So
Choose from hundreds of voices and get to work.
yeah, it's just like a little there's a little pause, like a little throaty pause in the middle of that that's quite satisfying. I'll do another one.
Choose from hundreds of voices and get to work.
And again, just ever such a slight kind of pulling forward of the end of the sentence. Again, it's just listening to it until you find the one that's just absolutely crisp, and then just going on to going all the way through them. And as I say, there's lots of different voices, so we can go in and pick. I don't know. Why don't we? We got anyone from Ecuador in here? I don't think so. Maybe not. Oh, it's got to be Australian, surely. Right, okay, let's try this.
Choose from hundreds of voices and get to work.
That's nice. That's not bad. And we'll do one more.
Let's try Fiona because she came up in our chat here.
Yeah, is this
Yeah.
alphabetized? Okay, I probably could have just typed it in. Fiona. Oh, she's English. This better be good. This better be very good. I've not used Fiona. I'll be able to tell if she's not English. I don't know if can you guys tell when an English person is doing an American accent? Because I can always tell when an American person is doing an English accent. There's just something in there that's not quite right.
Sometimes I'm a little thrown off, so I don't know.
Oh, okay.
You might be good at
Yeah.
picking it.
Right.
Choose from hundreds of voices and get to work.
That's pretty good. Well, I suppose that's the thing, right? So Fiona, and obviously that's not the actor's real name, but Fiona will be English. This is not an imitation of an English voice. This is an English actor doing the work in English, and then us reaping the benefit of that.
Choose from hundreds
and
of
obviously you've got
voices and get to work.
You've got lots of other functions as well. So one interesting point I think is that a lot of our work is in the B2B space, and what you find in the B2B space is there's often a lot of complexity in the way things are described. So there are product names or technologies or industries that have very specific language. I mean, around things that are like not the way it's spelled and the way it's on the page is not necessarily the way that it's said. And we found with WellSaid the phonetical capabilities are fantastic. So if we can spell it phonetically using WellSaid, then we get. There's even some weird stuff. I mean, when we did the. I think it was this video. There's a point where we talk. There's a longer version of the video where we talk about Adobe and
Yes.
the integration with Adobe. Now, the word Adobe that's not if you write that word out, you would say Adobe. You wouldn't say
Correct.
Adobe. There's only one E on it. So again, just a word that you take for granted as being pronounceable based on its spelling is not. So being able to phonetically spell out Adobe and have that be perfect as if I had said it. Also acronyms as well. We end up, I mean, we're swimming in acronyms. We're in the B2B space. Everything's a 3-letter acronym. Again, just having the ability to spell that out. IBM, it's makes our life a lot easier. And the Oxford Dictionary stuff is great as well. So being able to look up words within the dictionary and have the phonetics tied to that. So we get the word found in the dictionary and the phonetical spelling for it is just such a time saver. So there's lots of quality of life, apart from the good voices, there's lots of quality of life stuff in here, and it's quite easy to use. So it's been an interesting change because historically my relationship to voice has been it's often a bit of a pain in the process. Like it's the thing, you can see it in the horizon, you're gonna have to do it, but you're not really looking forward to it. Just not the talent. I love working with the talent. It's the process of setting it up, the booking, finding the space, finding the person, the time, just finding the time to do the thing. Just trying to get it organized is such a pain. So now it's just, I want to stick a voice on something, I can stick a voice on something. It just completely unblocked that kind of path for us. Trying to think if there's anything else in here. As I say, I'm not part of the product team, so I wouldn't know what else I should be calling out. But
No, I think you've done a good job. I know that there was a question that did come in saying that I have an issue sometimes with needing just a part of a take redone because it lacks nuance. I still need it to read all together for flow. So, best practices for editing parts of a statement. I feel like you kind of did a little bit of that with the consistent retakes with Alana. But if you have any
Yeah.
pointers,
Yeah, you might get a different answer from the product team. I find that the way we generally speak, whether it's in voiceover or in person, is you often get those natural pauses in the, like, whether it is a full stop and end of a sentence. So my tip, I suppose, is that I would do it in pieces, in sentences, and when you put it together, it will sound natural because there would have been pauses anyway when the person was reaching. People have to take a breath. So even if you can, I think if you put in a piece of text that is quite long and ran it, and then you did it line by line and put it together, I think you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. I don't think you joining it makes it any less of a float. But again, that's just my kind of take on it. I don't know if you might find in your experience that that's not the result you get. But the voiceover you heard in the video was done that way, as you're seeing here. It was done kind of sentence by sentence, and you can tune that. You can do kind of passages, maybe not the whole piece of text, but maybe one or two sentences or a paragraph. As far as I know, and I might be wrong on this, currently within these kinds of systems, there doesn't exist a way to like pick out a word in a generated piece of text and edit just that word. Again, it might be something that does exist somewhere, but it's not something I've come across. So I think running it in smaller batches is probably the solve for that particular issue.
awesome. Yeah. And I think it would also be great for those who are interested in kind of diving more into that. We actually have a webinar coming up on October 20th, which will likely touch on some of those new features. So it's perfect timing with the question. It is, I want to make sure I'm getting the title right, Building a Future with AI Voice. That will be the name of the webinar. So I see that it was dropped here in our chat for registration. So if anyone was interested in participating, there you are. You will learn more there. All right. So I feel like that was just kind of really, really cool to see the various takes that were done, hearing about your process and your workflow. I think with our conversation around ethics, you brought up ethical sourcing, why it's so important. And also just across the board, how you're able to really kind of walk through the stages of building a story, building a brand, building a voice, no pun intended there, for your clients. When it comes to AI voice and marketing, what implications, I guess, kind of thinking a little bit forward, do you think that leaders or even those who are in the thick of kind of creating this content, they should be paying attention to?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, just to kind of refer back to what I'm doing this week. So I'm at GITEX in Dubai, and it's, I think they bill it as the biggest tech conference in the world. It is, I mean, it's astonishing. It's airplane hangars worth of brands and technology. It's just every brand you would think of, from Microsoft, Salesforce, Cisco. Our main client over here is a company called G42. They're a group of companies that do the infrastructure of intelligence. They do the data centers, the cloud computing, the satellites, the smart city technology, edge computing. So they bring the kind of infrastructure layer in the same way that you need infrastructure to run electricity or these other kind of fundamental utilities in our life. They see the kind of infrastructure of this intelligence, and I think what we're seeing is, as marketers and kind of advocates for brand, um, again, referring back to an earlier answer, we're trying to communicate, right? We're trying to communicate with people on a personal level, and marketing is essentially the challenge of marketing is, how do you have a precise conversation with a wide range of people? Because I almost see it as I'm stood in a room and there's 1,000 people in front of me, and I can say one thing, and that's brand awareness, right? That's top of the funnel. I can say one thing to everyone. And as I move through the funnel, that group of 1,000 people starts to segment. So whether that's by industry or by role, by region, by need, these groups get smaller and smaller until you get to the very bottom of the funnel, and it kind of turns into sales at that point, because when you're talking to one person at the other end of that journey, that's a sales conversation. So ideally, what marketing wants to be doing is having the conversation, the big conversation, but at the individual level. Now, AI is going to allow us to do that because what we can say is no matter what your industry, role, level, need, whatever it is, whatever defines you within the marketing context, we can create an experience that is best suited to you. You know, oh, you want that in a podcast. Oh, you want that in a white paper. You want to listen to that on the train. You want another version of that video that's an explainer. You know, content up until now has been predefined kind of sets of assets. So you say, we're going to create that white paper, and that's the only version of that white paper that will ever live. We'll create that video, that explainer video that you just showed us. You know, a lot of work went into that, but it's almost like set in stone. You know, we would do an edit for you if you needed it, but it's it's a kind of defined thing. And we in marketing and with our clients, we've been in the business of producing those things, whether it be as big as a website or as small as a social tile. It's delivered, it's out in the world, and that's the only version of that that's ever going to live. I think content is moving towards being more of almost like a ball of energy, like an idea. You know, the thing that spawns the white paper or the social tile or the podcast or the web page, they all feed back to that central idea or concept. And we take that concept, whether it is a campaign or a product, and we find ways of communicating. Well, to be honest, we make that decision as marketers. We say, we're going to do this as a white paper, we're going to do this as a webinar, you know, we're going to do this as a thing. We're not the ones that should be making that decision. The consumers should be making that decision. They should be saying, I want that information as, and we're in the business of putting together the ball of energy that can produce these things. It can be turned into a white paper. It can be turned into a podcast, and we let the end consumer decide how they want to consume that. And I think part of that then is using AI and specifically AI voice to enable that. If they want it as a podcast, if they want it as a video, if they want on the fly generated with AI, then voice is a massive component of that because a number of those assets are going to be delivered through voice. You know, we're one of the things that we're seeing with one of our clients is, you know, what is the role of a website? Again, another asset that we have just taken for granted over the last 30 years that is a thing that exists and will never change. There was a time where there were no websites. There was a time where companies printed brochures and that was the thing. That was the website of its day. And then you get into kind of the mid 90s and all of a sudden it's like, oh, and we have a web page. Oh, how quaint, how novel, you know. Oh, you have a web page. That's very futuristic of you. And then as you move into the late 90s, into the 2000s, it turns into, oh, you have a brochure, do you? Oh, that's very quaint. That's very old school, you know. And now the website is just the foundational cornerstone of brand and marketing. It's the main channel, the main asset. Well, it may not always be that way. It might be the case that we are on a journey where that is going to phase out, and the next thing is going to be some kind of some touch point where either delivered through AI agents or some other mechanism, you are going to be able to consume information, but not by visiting a website. And it could be, and I believe that is one of the main ways that's going to be delivered is through voice. Now, if that is true, then the generation of voice becomes the thing that's important. Just in the way that whether it's ChatGPT or Gemini or these, we're in a text generation phase of AI, right? We're in the kind of early internet where I mean, there's like so many memes about it, but those early web pages, you know, those kind of really we look at them now as clunky, but at the time they were like the new thing. You know, the text generation is now really firmly embedded, but we're now moving into video generation. There's some crazy good video generators out there. I don't know if anyone wants to see something really interesting, go and look at Google's Genie. Right, Google Genie is the generation of 3D worlds. So any of you out there who play computer games or into kind of 3D world building, this is generating a 3D world on the fly that you can navigate. So imagine you can go back to ancient Rome, you could go to the Renaissance, you could go wherever your heart desires. Go stand at on the field at Gettysburg. You know, these work you can construct these worlds and they will be generated on the fly. You know, it's the text generation is the first start. Then it's image, then it's video, then it's 3D. All of these are all image based, text or image based. They're not audio. I think you're starting to see, music, generation of music through AI. Very contentious. There's a thing on Spotify where there's a band that's all AI generated. It caused a huge stir because people didn't know whether it was or it wasn't, and we're kind of in that phase at the moment as well. So I think pulling it back round to voice, I think that wherever this is going, and we don't know where it's going, but we can kind of see some of the path. I think voice is just an enormous component of that because, as I said at the outset, I think that our voice is that it will always be until we get a chip in our brains, the voice will always be the most effective way to exchange information with another human. It will always, because it's been evolving for millions of years. Like it's the most perfect thing that you can use to exchange information. So again, if that's true, then that has to be what we move towards because we're in the business of transferring information. There was a time where you had to send a message via a pigeon. And now you and I and all of these lovely people are talking from all around the world. It's just an age we live in. And we have to imagine that's going to continue. I don't see any reason why that trend is going to stop. The point where our voice comes a means of control, be it a website. You know, Obviously we've had things like Alexa for a while. But I mean, I do love my Alexa, but it does. It's not like I don't feel like I'm talking, like having a conversation. It's like, it effectively boils down to can you set a timer or what's the weather? I mean, that's 90% of my use of Alexa, but that should be conversational. Our interface. If I was actually Sam Altman gave a talk today at the event that we were at, and I think the way that's going is that our interface with applications, websites, all of these things is going to be through agents, and it's probably going to be through voice. We're finally going to get a version of Siri that is good, or a version of Alexa where you can say, "Can you do these three things for me?" and it just gets it, and it just does it. We'll look back on having to go book a table or anything as like being very quaint. Why can't your thing just do that for you? Why did you have to go and type it out? Why didn't it just do it for you? I think that's gonna. I'm always in. Sorry, I'm off on a tangent, but I'm always interested on the things that we look back on now as being like, oh, how weird, and then like you look back on it and you're like, I can't believe people used to do that. You know, what are the things we're doing today that in 20 years people are going to look back on and go, I cannot believe you used to do that. And what are those things? Because if we can identify those things, then they're the things that's where the change is. You know.
Yes.
Sorry, again, I'm do this all day until you tell me to stop.
No, no, that was great because you answered one of my questions. I was going to ask you, where did you see the future of AI voice? And even thinking of the conference that you're at, I know I think I was scrolling on social media and happened to see that there's another tech conference coming up. And I think she may be the CEO of the org, but she couldn't necessarily be there physically because she's on
Hmm.
maternity leave. So she actually has a generation of her that is going to show up at the conference and will
Yeah.
be able to engage with people in real time through the power, not just of being able to kind of teleport herself there in a sense of the word, but her voice will be present. So, like you said, that is one of the most powerful things that we have to be able to communicate. And because it is her basically showing up, making sure that that brand is recognized across all platforms. So, a lot of evolution taking place, that's for sure.
Yeah, and just there was a very cool thing that I saw this afternoon, which is one of our clients over here is a company called Casner, and they build the data centers. So they work with Microsoft to build data centers in the UAE, and they were teaming up with one of the other companies within the G42 group, a company called Analog, and Analog do all of the kind of virtual reality and data analytics within the G42 group. So what they had was this demo. It was a big round table and we all put on these Apple goggles, and the person giving the demo was showing us on the table a model of one of the data centers, but it was a real-time model. So they've got these robot dogs that walk around the data center to it's like health and safety, like are the fire extinguishers in the right place? Is everyone wearing the correct protective equipment? Those kinds of things. we could actually see in real time in 3D on this play table the little dogs walking around the data center in their actual position. Now, where this comes around to voice is they had an assistant next to me in the not in real life, but in the goggles. You could see the assistant stood there, and the person giving the demo was talking to the assistant saying, can you now show us all of the calling, I can't remember what they call them, it's like the thing on top of the data center that calls all the data center. So he would say, oh, can you, Anna was the name of the assistant, Anna, can you now show us all of the cooling fans on the roof? And it spins for a second, and then it says, yeah, absolutely, I'll show you the thing. And then everything else peels away in 3D, and you just see all the cooling infrastructure on top of the thing. And then he says, oh, thanks, Anna. Can you now show us the security gate or some such thing? And it just pans across, and he just does it like he's using his voice to talk to an agent, and that agent is understanding it and then commanding into this 3D environment, this play table. It was just astonishing, and you could tell this was the start of something. I find those quite uncomfortable, those goggles, but like it's just the start. It's the brick of a phone or the massive laptop that people would carry around in the late 90s. It's like the first version of that. When that becomes slick, and the funny thing was, I can see the other people around the table. It's mixed reality. So I'm not in like a VR goggle thing. I mean, like I can see them, I can see the model, I can see people walking around the event, but I've got this like amazing crisp 3D model. And as I kind of peer into it, I can get closer to the dog. It's just amazing, just incredible. But the voice component really made it work because he just had a conversation with the agent and the agent did the thing. So again, if we're talking about where the future's going, I think that demo would not have been very effective, I think, if he had have been like pressing a button and what if he wanted to do something different? What if he wanted to say, oh, now go and it's actually part of a digital twin of the whole UAE. They zoomed into the data center, but it's got the airport, it's got the harbor, it's got everything. So on the fly, someone around the table could just say, can you now take me to the Etihad Arena where there's a concert going on? And it would just zoom across. So
Wow.
voice control, voice interaction, natural language. It's the quickest and most natural and most effective way for us to get things done. It's just not something we generally use because it's so difficult to achieve. We're used to typing on our, for years it was oral, and then just the last like 30, 40 years where we've used computers, we've got used to typing on a thing.
Mhm.
But it might not necessarily be that way. It might not be that we type everything out all day. It's probably not good for us. Yeah.
Yeah, well, definitely going to see, like you said, this evolution, and also just understanding it's not necessarily about replacing that human creativity, but scaling on that, and
Oh, yeah.
just being able to see where things can go from there. So I think with this, we are coming up on time, but this has been an amazing conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed just hearing, not just about your workflow, but hearing about how things are currently evolving in real time, with you being at this convention. And just, thank you so much for your time. I know it's getting late over there. So we definitely appreciate you
Not too
chiming
bad.
in with us and sharing your amazing work. Like I said, we are definitely appreciative of you. I will make sure that we have our link dropped into the chat for the case study if anyone is looking to find out more about how the frameworks has been able to integrate WellSaid into their video workflow, excuse me, if you're looking for some best practices beyond what you've heard today. Also, for all things WellSaid, be sure to follow us on social media. Any additional questions that you have, you can visit us at our help center for also upcoming webinars, or you can email us. I will drop this email here for our marketing email to become a part of our WellSaid Legends community. And here you'll get exclusive sneak peeks, invitations to various events, access to our product team, and much, much more. So, Chris, again, thank you so much for joining us today. I will have to shout out Marina in our chat from our product support team for helping us in that regard, making sure those questions got answered for you all. And thank you all from all parts of the world for joining us today. We cannot wait to see how you use WellSaid to create your amazing content. So until next time, happy creating.